The city has many faces, but the one it shows at dawn is the most honest. No crowds yet to hide behind, no noise to drown the small sounds, just stone walls still cool from the night, faint echoes of distant roosters, and the slow creak of shutters being lifted by hands that have done the same motion for decades. I ride in that hour when the light is thin and uncertain, camera low against my chest, capturing the way shadows stretch long and thin across the pavement like fingers reaching for something they can never quite touch. There is a small square near the old fountain where 3 alleys converge like veins meeting at a heart. The fountain itself is dry, its marble basin cracked and filled with dust and fallen leaves. A single iron bench sits bolted to the ground, rust eating at its legs. No one famous ever sat there, no plaques, no stories written about it. Yet every morning, long before the first prayer call drifts over the rooftops, she is there. A girl, perhaps 14, perhaps 15. Thin frame under a faded blue cardigan that hangs loose on her shoulders, sleeves rolled up twice to fit her arms. Hair pulled back with a piece of red ribbon that has frayed at the edges and lost most of its shine. In front of her, spread on a piece of old cloth directly on the stone, sits a single plastic bucket. Inside it, no more than 15 or 20 rose stems, red mostly, some pink, 1 or 2 white, never arranged in neat bunches. Just cut, wrapped loosely in yesterday's newspaper, thorns still sharp, petals still holding the night's dew. She doesn't call out, doesn't stand and wave the flowers at passers-by, doesn't promise love, luck, or forgiveness like the vendors in the bigger markets. She sits quietly, knees drawn up to her chest, back against the fountain's edge, eyes following the pigeons that hop around the dry basin, looking for crumbs that aren't there. When someone approaches, she lifts her gaze not eagerly, not desperately, just calmly, as if she has already decided long ago that most people will keep walking. I first noticed her months ago, rode past without stopping. The bucket was fuller then, almost overflowing. Red roses mostly. She looked up for a second as my shadow passed over her cloth, then returned to watching the pigeons. Something about the stillness made me circle back the next morning, and the morning after. The first time I bought one, it was a red rose. I handed her a coin. She took it without looking at it, placed it in the small metal tin beside her, and passed me the stem. No words, no smile, just the smallest nod, the kind strangers give when they share the same patch of shade on a hot day. The second time, another red. Same silence. The third time, pink. Still nothing. On the 4th morning I spoke. "What's your name?" "Noor," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the early wind moving through the alleys. "How long have you been coming here every day?" "Since I was 9. "With your family?" "My grandmother used to sit beside me. She died last winter. Now it's just me." She said it plainly, without drama, the way someone reports that the bus is late. I wanted to ask how old she was when her grandmother left, why she kept coming alone, where the flowers came from. But her eyes returned to the pigeons, and the question stayed in my throat. Over the following weeks, I learned her routine the way you learn a street you ride every day, without asking, just by watching. She arrives when the stars are still sharp, carrying the bucket balanced on her head, wrapped in an old shawl to protect the petals from the dew. The flowers come from her uncle's small plot of land on the edge of the city, a patch no bigger than a living room. He cuts them after midnight so they stay fresh through the heat of the day. She walks nearly 3 kilometers each way before first light, steps careful on the broken sidewalks, bucket steady as if it were part of her body. She sits until the sun climbs high enough to make the square unbearable. Sells what she can, sometimes 3 stems, sometimes 12, sometimes none. Whatever remains at the end of the day she gives away. To the old women who sit near the mosque entrance begging quietly, to the street cats that gather when the square empties, to children who pass by with wide eyes and empty hands. She never throws a single flower away. Not once. One morning the bucket held only 8 roses, fewer than usual. I asked why. "The land is tired," she said. "Uncle says the well is lower every summer. If we take too much now, next spring there will be nothing left, so I bring less. Better a few good ones than many that die before noon." She spoke like someone who had already done the math in her head, petals versus water, days versus seasons, survival versus beauty. I started coming earlier. Sometimes I brought bread from the bakery that opens at 4:30, sometimes a bottle of water. She never refused, but she never asked for anything either. Once, she offered me a white rose for free. I tried to pay. She shook her head. "For listening," she said. "You always listen." I took the rose. It had no scent yet, too early. But the thorn caught my thumb. A tiny bead of blood appeared. She noticed, reached into her tin, pulled out a small square of clean cloth, and handed it to me without a word. I wrapped my thumb. She returned to watching the pigeons. The heat came harder as summer deepened. The square baked. The fountain stayed dry. Noor kept coming. Same cardigan, same ribbon, now almost pink from sun and dust. Same bucket, smaller every week. One morning, she wasn't there. The bench empty, the cloth gone. I waited 30 minutes, then rode on with a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. She returned 2 days later. Different spot, not the square. A narrow side street near the covered market, where the buildings lean close and the sun reaches the ground later. No fountain, no bench. Just a flattened cardboard box on the ground and the bucket with 5 roses. 3 red, 2 white. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from crying, but from nights without enough sleep. "Uncle is sick," she said before I opened my mouth. "He can't cut the flowers anymore. The land needs him. I went to help, but I don't know how to choose the right stems. These are the last ones he cut before he stayed in bed." I sat on the ground beside her. For the first time, she didn't look away when I spoke. "What happens now?" "I don't know. My aunt wants us to move to her house in the new neighborhood. She has a small shop. She says I can help her sell cloth instead of flowers. But cloth doesn't smell like morning. Cloth doesn't need water. Cloth doesn't die if you forget it for a day." She touched one of the white roses. The petals trembled under her fingertip. These were supposed to be for weddings. White for new beginnings. Red for love that lasts. Now they're just waiting. I didn't buy any that day. I couldn't bring myself to take them. Instead, I asked if I could stay until she packed. She nodded. We sat in silence as the street slowly woke. A baker rolled up his shutter with a loud clang. 2 boys ran past kicking a crushed plastic bottle. An old woman shuffled by, bought 1 red rose, paid with small coins, and whispered a blessing before disappearing around the corner. Noor thanked her so softly I almost missed it. When the sun finally reached the cardboard, she began to gather the stems, wrapped each one carefully in its newspaper scrap, lifted the bucket onto her head with the same steady motion she had used since she was 9. Before she left, she turned to me. "Tomorrow I may come here again, or maybe another place. If you don't find me, thank you for the mornings you sat." She walked away. The red ribbon caught a stray beam of sunlight, a small flag of color against a gray stone. For the next week, the square stayed empty. The side street too. I rode every dawn, checking corners, fountains, benches, cardboard patches. Nothing. On the 10th day, I saw her again. Different alley. Closer to the river this time. No fountain, no bench, no shade. Just her, the bucket, and 4 roses. 2 red, 2 white. She looked thinner. The cardigan hung looser, but her eyes were clear. "Uncle is better," she said when I stopped. "He can sit up now. He told me to keep going, even if it's only 4, even if it's only 1, because someone might need a flower today, even if they don't know it yet." She handed me a white rose. This time I took it, paid more than it cost. She accepted the extra coins without protest, placed them carefully in the tin. After that morning, I began to see her in different places, sometimes near the market entrance, sometimes by the school gate when classes let out, sometimes back at the old square, always early, always quiet, always with fewer flowers than the day before, but never none. One evening, long after sunset, I rode past the square again, the fountain dark, the bench empty, but on the ground near the basin lay a single white rose, fresh, thorn still sharp, no bucket. No girl, no ribbon. I picked it up, held it under the street lamp. The petals glowed pale in the yellow light. I still ride at dawn, still look for small buckets, for red ribbons, for eyes that wait without demanding. Sometimes I think I catch a glimpse, a thin shadow slipping around a corner, a flash of blue cardigan, the faint scent of roses carried on the wind. I don't know if Noor still sells flowers. I don't know if her uncle ever walked the land again. I don't know if she moved or stayed or found another way to keep giving what little the earth allowed. But the streets remember. They remember the girl who never threw a flower away, who carried roses 3 kilometers before light so someone, anyone, might find beauty on an ordinary morning, who gave even when there was almost nothing left to give. And every time I ride past an empty fountain or a dry bench, I slow down. I listen, because some whispers don't need words. They just need someone to keep riding by, morning after morning, until the city itself starts telling the story back.